In the confined space of an airplane, where everyone desires a peaceful journey, an unexpected event ignited a simmering but meaningful debate. When a congresswoman was asked to remove her religious symbol, her response and the reactions of the passengers around her demonstrated the power of calmness and collective voice in defending fundamental values. This story is not just an incident in the air, but a profound reminder of the right to religious freedom and mutual respect. When a flight attendant told Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett to remove her cross mid-flight, she didn't argue. She just stayed calm. But what happened next made the entire plane stop and take notice. The gate at Tulsa International was unusually quiet for a Thursday evening. Jasmine Crockett, Congresswoman for Texas's 30th District, tucked her phone into her blazer pocket and glanced at the boarding screen. Flight 4387 to Washington, D.C., on time. She let out a breath. After 5 days packed with town halls, student roundtables, and a late-night community forum in Dallas that ran an hour over, Jasmine was worn thin. Her voice was hoarse, her ankles ached in her heels, and the last decent meal she'd had was a cold veggie wrap from a gas station. But she felt good. She was headed back to the Hill with notes full of real voices. That was the work. That was why she ran. The woman at the gate gave her a kind smile, scanning her boarding pass. "You're in for a today, Congresswoman." "Perfect," Jasmine said with a polite nod. "I need that window." She made her way down the jet bridge, rolling her small black carry-on behind her. Her hand instinctively adjusted the slim gold cross that rested against her chest, a gift from her late grandmother. The chain was thin, the pendant no larger than a dime, but its weight always kept her steady. She touched it when she spoke. She held it when she needed quiet. It wasn't just jewelry. It was memory, prayer, and presence all in one. Once inside, the aircraft was still half empty. She settled into her seat, slipped off her heels, and pulled out her Kindle. Across the aisle, a man in his 50s wearing a U.S. Navy cap gave her a polite nod. She smiled back. The boarding dragged a little. Families juggling strollers, a teenager arguing with her mom over the armrest, someone already asking if the Wi-Fi worked. Nothing unusual. Jasmine slid her cross gently back under the lapel of her blazer. She leaned her head against the window, not quite asleep, but grateful for the pause. That's when she saw her, the flight attendant, mid-40s maybe, sandy hair pulled back tight, uniform crisp. Her name, tag, read Darnell. She was walking the aisle with a clipboard, checking cabin rows before takeoff. She paused near Jasmine, looked down briefly, and then crouched ever so slightly to speak at eye level. "Ma'am," she said in a hushed voice, eyes flicking to the small cross on Jasmine's chest. "We're asking that you remove any visible religious symbols during the flight. It's company policy." At first, Jasmine thought she'd misheard. Her brow furrowed slightly, and she tilted her head. "I'm sorry, what kind of policy is that?" she asked, her voice calm but clear. Darnell's posture didn't change. "It's just for uniformity and passenger comfort. We ask all passengers to refrain from displaying religious items." Jasmine glanced around. 2 rows up, a man was wearing a visible yarmulke. Across the aisle, the woman reading a novel had a delicate Star of David pendant. Neither of them seemed to be under review. "And you're asking me to take off a cross?" Jasmine said, not raising her voice, not yet moving, just clarifying. "Yes, ma'am," Darnell replied, a bit more curt now. "We'd appreciate your cooperation." Jasmine's fingers moved slowly to the pendant, holding it gently, not to remove it, but just to feel it there. She didn't respond right away. She was thinking about how fast these things could spiral, about how silence could be mistaken for agreement, and about her grandmother, whose name was engraved in the back of that cross. The Navy vet across the aisle shifted. He'd heard. His eyes didn't leave the flight attendant. Behind Jasmine, a child stopped mid-conversation. The mood changed, not loud, not hostile, just different, thicker somehow, watching. Jasmine didn't make a scene. She looked at Darnell, her expression firm, but still kind. "I'm going to keep it on," she said plainly, "but thank you." Darnell blinked, as if surprised by how calmly it was said. She didn't argue, just nodded stiffly and turned, walking briskly toward the front of the plane. Jasmine turned back to the window, not saying a word. She didn't need to. But just as she settled in, something happened that made her sit up straighter. Jasmine didn't move. Her fingers stayed loosely wrapped around the cross at her chest, her eyes scanning the seat back in front of her as her mind replayed the exchange like a slow reel. She wasn't new to awkward moments. Politics, especially in recent years, had thickened her skin. But this wasn't about party lines or policy. This was personal. This was someone singling her out in public for something that had nothing to do with safety or protocol. She glanced again across the aisle. The Navy veteran was still watching. He leaned in slightly. "I didn't hear them say that to anyone else," he said quietly. Jasmine offered a faint smile. "Neither did I." A few rows back, a teenage girl with curly hair and oversized headphones slid one side off her ear. "You serious? She told you to take that off?" "Yeah," Jasmine replied, still calm. "Said it made people uncomfortable." The girl blinked. "But it's just a cross." Jasmine didn't answer, but the girl shook her head and put her headphones back on. Only now, her phone was in her hand, camera angled slightly forward. From row 6, a woman in a gray cardigan stood to adjust something in the overhead bin. She wasn't particularly obvious, but her glance toward Jasmine was anything but accidental. Jasmine had seen that kind of glance before, one that carried both curiosity and suspicion. Within minutes, the murmurs began. The passengers were doing what people do when something doesn't sit right, looking around for others to confirm they weren't imagining it, whispering across aisles, pretending to scroll on their phones while watching everything. Then the same flight attendant came back. She stopped 2 rows ahead, bent slightly to speak with an older woman, and then made her way back toward Jasmine. Her expression was tight now, more clipped, like someone who had been told to finish a job they didn't want to be doing. "Ma'am," she said again, just loud enough for nearby rows to hear, "we do need compliance with visible attire guidelines before we depart." This time, Jasmine didn't respond right away. She looked at the woman slowly, meeting her eyes, and spoke just loud enough for several rows to hear. "Is there a written policy you can show me?" The attendant blinked. "Ma'am, this is standard." "I understand," Jasmine replied, "but you're asking me to remove a religious symbol that I've worn on hundreds of flights, including this airline. I'm asking you to show me where this policy is written." Darnell hesitated for a moment. Neither of them said anything. The air between them tensed like a stretched wire. Then, as if suddenly aware of the eyes around her, Darnell straightened. "I'll check with my supervisor," she said quickly, and turned. Jasmine leaned back. The girl with the headphones was now holding her phone openly. The Navy vet muttered, "That's a first." And in row 9, a man in a maroon hoodie leaned forward and whispered something to his seatmate. Heads turned again. No one was yelling, no one was panicking, but everyone was alert now. People were watching because they knew, deep down, that something was off. Jasmine didn't want drama. That wasn't her instinct. She believed in structure, in addressing things through proper channels. But this was happening now, and it was happening here, and it was happening to her. Not in some email, not on a debate stage. Right here in seat 4A at 33,000 feet. She reached down and pulled her bag onto her lap, rummaging quietly through a folder of papers, not to make a scene. She just needed something to focus on, something to stop her hands from shaking just a little. In the front galley, the curtain rustled. Someone new appeared. A taller woman in a blazer, likely the supervisor, glanced toward Jasmine's row. She didn't walk over, just observed. Jasmine met her eyes, then looked back down. Her hands steadied. She remembered the time her mother told her to always hold her ground, but never lose her cool. "Don't shout," she'd said. "Make them come to your level." That's what Jasmine was doing. Waiting, sitting still, making sure people saw her as she was. But the more she looked around, the more Jasmine realized this wasn't going to be ignored. The plane hadn't moved an inch, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. Jasmine stayed still in her seat. She wasn't trying to prove anything, but she also wasn't about to shrink herself down. If this was really about policy, she wanted to see it written. But deep down, she suspected it wasn't about a policy at all. She looked up just in time to see the curtain open again. The supervisor, Benim Asen Sipsapash, the one in the Navy blazer who had been watching from the galley, began making her way down the aisle. Her steps were deliberate, her face composed in that particular way flight crews get trained for. She stopped right beside Jasmine's row and leaned in slightly. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said softly. Jasmine looked up, unfazed. "Yes, I'm Lillian Grant, in-flight supervisor. I just wanted to clarify there's been some misunderstanding earlier. I believe one of our attendants may have misapplied an internal recommendation." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "A recommendation?" The supervisor cleared her throat. "It's not mandatory, just a guideline for crew awareness during certain high-sensitivity flights. Not something we enforce with passengers." "Is that what she told you?" Jasmine asked calmly, still holding the cross between her fingers. The woman hesitated. "I'm still gathering the full picture." From a few rows back, a voice piped up. It was the teenager in the headphones. She asked her twice to take it off. Nobody else got asked. And from the aisle, the Navy vet added, "I've been flying for 30 years. I've never heard of anything like that." Jasmine wasn't alone in this anymore. The moment had outgrown her. She could feel it in how the passengers shifted in their seats. No one was angry, but people were present now, awake to what was happening. Then someone spoke from directly behind her. "That necklace isn't bothering anyone. She's got a right to wear it." Jasmine turned to see a woman in her late 60s, white hair tied into a bun, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked like someone's favorite school librarian. "My name is Florence Rollins," the woman said, leaning slightly over the seat. "I taught American history for 40 years. That cross stays on. Don't let them take that from you." Jasmine blinked. There was something about the way the woman said it, like she meant it, not just for Jasmine, but for every student she ever taught. The supervisor nodded stiffly and said, "Thank you for your input, ma'am." Then she turned to Jasmine again. "You're free to wear it. There will be no further issue." Jasmine gave a simple nod. "Good to hear." Supervisor Grant straightened up, gave a tight smile, and turned to head back to the front. But even as she left, Jasmine felt eyes still on her, not judging, not angry, just watching, processing. The woman in row 6, the one who'd earlier glanced with suspicion, leaned slightly forward now. Her voice was low but clear. "I'm sorry," she said. "I think I jumped to conclusions." Jasmine turned, surprised. "It's okay. I guess I'm just tired of the tension of everything turning into something." Jasmine smiled gently. "I didn't try to make it a thing. I just wanted to fly home." The woman nodded. "I get that." Jasmine turned back to her seat, her hands resting on her lap again. A few more minutes passed slowly. The boarding announcements resumed. Bags thumped into overhead compartments. The hum of conversation returned. But it wasn't the same. It was quieter, more careful, like everyone was holding on to something they hadn't expected to carry when they walked on board. Then the overhead lights dimmed, and the captain's voice crackled through the speaker, announcing they were ready for departure. Jasmine adjusted her seat belts and stared out the window. Oklahoma faded behind them as the plane began to taxi. She breathed in slowly. She hadn't come here to make a point, but sometimes the point finds you. But this was no longer just a request. It was becoming a test. 30 minutes into the flight, the cabin lights had dimmed. Most passengers had settled into their routines. Movies, podcasts, snacks unwrapped with that familiar crinkle. The air had calmed, but it wasn't entirely comfortable. It felt like something had been left open, unfinished. Jasmine sat quietly in 4A, her tray table down, a half-full cup of ginger ale untouched beside her. The small cross around her neck still rested gently on her chest. She hadn't hidden it. She wasn't the type to make her presence louder than necessary, but she also wasn't about to tuck something away just to make someone else more at ease. As she read through handwritten notes in the margin of a community feedback form, someone in Tulsa had brought up school zoning laws. She felt a light tap on her shoulder. She turned. It was the older woman behind her, Mrs. Florence Rollins, the retired history teacher. Her voice was gentle, careful not to disturb the others. "I didn't want to interrupt, but I just wanted to say again, you handled that well. Not everyone would have kept their cool like that." Jasmine smiled softly. "Thank you. I just didn't want it to turn into a spectacle." Florence lowered her voice. "You showed restraint. That's leadership. Some of us were watching more closely than you think." Jasmine paused for a second, then asked, "Why do you think she did it?" Florence shrugged, her hands folded in her lap. "Could have been anything. Bias, misunderstanding, orders from someone else. People carry their own fears around these days. Some of them don't even realize what they're reacting to." Jasmine nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, sometimes it's not even personal, but still lands personal." Just then, a rustling sound came from a few rows back. Someone stood up. Row 9, near the wing, a tall, lean man with dark-rimmed glasses and a Howard University hoodie. He looked to be in his mid-20s, maybe a law student. He stood there for a beat too long, one hand gripping the headrest in front of him. "Excuse me," he said, voice even but clear. "I wasn't going to say anything, but I can't just sit here and act like that didn't happen." All eyes turned to him. "I watched what happened earlier," he continued, "and I've got questions. Not just about policy, about consistency. Because if there's a policy like that, it wasn't applied to anyone else. And if there isn't, then we need to ask why one person got singled out." The cabin was quiet now. No music, no movie chatter, no coughs or sneezes, just the steady hum of the engines and his voice. "I'm a second-year law student. We study cases like this. Moments that seem small but mean a lot. Religious freedom, equal treatment. Those things don't stop when we're 30,000 feet in the air." He looked toward Jasmine's row but didn't point, didn't grandstand. I don't know what that flight attendant was thinking. Maybe she thought she was doing the right thing. But intention doesn't erase impact. And I think we owe each other enough respect to call things out when they feel wrong. The older man across the aisle clapped once, just once, but it echoed. Then the girl with the headphones gave a quiet "thank you" and lowered her phone. A few others nodded, murmurs spreading in low voices. No shouting, just recognition. Jasmine didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Amari, the young man who'd stood, sat down again. No drama, no disruption. Florence leaned forward again. It's moments like these that shape people. That boy might go argue in front of the Supreme Court someday, and part of him will remember this flight. Jasmine glanced at her cross again, then back at Florence. "You think it made a difference?" The older woman smiled. "It already did." But just as things seemed to quiet down, someone stood up in row 9 after Amari sat back down. The quiet didn't return the same way it had before. Something had shifted, not in tone, but in truth. The words he spoke still hovered in the space above the aisle, as if waiting to be fully absorbed. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. The supervisor, Lillian Grant, reappeared near the front of the plane. She had that airline professional composure stitched into every movement, but even she couldn't deny the shift in temperature. Passengers had seen it, heard it, felt it. And though the plane cruised steadily eastward, the atmosphere was no longer cruising on autopilot. From 3 rows behind Jasmine, a middle-aged man with sleeves rolled to his elbows leaned out into the aisle. "Hey, just out of curiosity," he called up toward the supervisor, "was there a policy or wasn't there?" His tone wasn't rude. He wasn't looking to argue, but he wasn't letting it go either. Supervisor Grant paused, turning slightly toward him. "Sir, there's no formal policy prohibiting religious jewelry. Any suggestion of that was a miscommunication." That word again, miscommunication. Another voice chimed in, a woman mid-30s with short hair and glasses, traveling with a toddler on her lap. "So what's going to happen to the flight attendant who asked her to take it off? Is that also a miscommunication?" Grant's smile thinned. "Ma'am, any crew concerns are handled internally. I assure you we're reviewing it." "Yeah, I bet," someone murmured. Jasmine, still seated, kept her eyes ahead. She didn't turn around. She didn't signal for backup. She didn't want this to become about punishment. That had never been her intent. But now people were speaking up, not for her necessarily, but for the principle of it. 2 rows ahead, a man in a maroon pullover raised his phone. "Just so we're clear," he said to no one in particular, "I've been wearing this St. Christopher medal since I boarded." Nobody said a word to me. He let it dangle in the aisle for a moment before tucking it back into his shirt. And across from him, a younger woman, maybe 19 or 20, turned to her neighbor and whispered they didn't ask the seat guy to take off his bracelet either. Jasmine finally spoke. She didn't raise her voice, didn't stand up. She simply said, I'm not looking for someone to be embarrassed or fired. I just want consistency and respect. That was it. Just 2 sentences, but they seemed to carry more weight than the commotion itself. Amari turned slightly in his seat and nodded once in her direction. Not for attention, just for acknowledgement. Supervisor Grant seemed to realize she was outmatched, not by volume, but by values. She cleared her throat again and addressed the whole section this time. Ladies and gentlemen, again, we thank you for your feedback and your patience. It's never our goal to make any passenger feel targeted or uncomfortable. Please know we're taking the matter seriously. She stepped back into the galley. The curtains swished closed, and then for the first time in over an hour, the cabin actually felt still. Jasmine looked down at her hands. Her right thumb brushed the edge of her grandmother's cross, tracing the familiar pattern. She didn't feel vindicated. She wasn't looking for that. But she felt seen, heard, not because of cameras or headlines, but because people spoke when it mattered. Florence leaned in one more time. Do you know what my students used to say when I asked why we study the past? Jasmine glanced over. What? To recognize the present. A quiet smile tugged at the corner of Jasmine's mouth. That's a good answer. Florence nodded. It's the only one that ever stuck. But no one expected what the flight supervisor would say next. An hour later, the captain announced their descent into Reagan National Airport. The usual buzz returned, seat backs raised, tray tables stowed, everyone adjusting their bags and posture like waking from a long nap. But there was something different about this landing. Jasmine looked out the window. City lights shimmered in the distance, scattered like gold against the dark. She'd flown this route dozens of times, but tonight she wasn't thinking about committee schedules or pending bills. She was thinking about how quickly a normal evening had turned into a quiet stand for something she didn't plan, and how every single person on that plane would walk away remembering it. The curtain parted one last time before landing. Supervisor Grant emerged again, walking down the aisle, not clipboard in hand, not checking for bags, just walking. When she reached Jasmine's row, she paused. I wanted to apologize again, she said, voice low enough not to stir the other passengers. It never should have happened the way it did. Jasmine looked up at her, calm and composed. You've said that. The woman hesitated. If there's any way I can help clarify this with corporate. I'm not filing a report, Jasmine interrupted gently. That's not what this is about. Grant looked relieved, but Jasmine leaned forward slightly. But you need to know what happened back there. It wasn't just poor judgment. It was a reflection of something bigger, something that shows up everywhere, in policies, in silence, in who we choose to correct and who we ignore. Grant gave a slow nod. Understood. Then, almost unexpectedly, she added, when I started flying 20 years ago, we were told to spot potential flashpoints. People, items, language, anything that might make passengers uncomfortable. That mindset sticks with you, even when it shouldn't. Jasmine studied her face. It wasn't an excuse. It was a glimpse. I hear you, she said, but we got to stop treating presence like it's a problem. Grant gave a quiet, thank you, then turned and walked away. As the wheels touched down and the brakes engaged, the passengers leaned forward in that familiar bracing position. Some clutched their phones, some closed their eyes, and some, like Jasmine, simply sat back and exhaled. The moment was over, but it hadn't ended. When the aircraft reached the gate, seat belts clicked and overhead bins flew open. The usual scramble began, but here and there, passengers moved a little slower. A few exchanged glances. Amari gave Jasmine a subtle thumbs up as he grabbed his backpack. Florence patted Jasmine's shoulder gently as she passed. You did good, sweetheart. The teenage girl with the headphones gave a small wave. I posted the clip. It's already getting traction. Jasmine didn't reply. She simply nodded and stepped off the plane, back into the air of the terminal. Her phone buzzed before she'd even cleared the jet bridge. First, a text from a staffer. Hey, something's blowing up on Twitter. You okay? Then a voicemail from a news anchor she recognized. And then, inevitably, the headlines started popping up. Congresswoman asked to remove cross mid-flight. Passengers push back. Policy or prejudice? In-flight, incident sparks debate. She tucked the phone into her coat pocket. Outside, a black SUV waited at the curb. Her driver, Kenneth stepped out and opened the door. "Rough flight?" he asked. Jasmine smirked faintly. "Let's just say I didn't sleep much." As they pulled away from the terminal, she rested her head back against the seat and looked out the window again, not to retreat but to process. Because this wasn't about a necklace. It wasn't even about a flight. It was about how quickly people notice what makes someone different, how that difference can be labeled discomfort, and how sometimes the only thing that keeps us from slipping into silence is the decision to stay visible. In the end, Jasmine hadn't shouted, hadn't demanded, hadn't stormed off. She had simply remained with her cross, with her calm, with her voice. And that was enough. Some fights don't need a megaphone, just a steady heart and a crowd that refuses to look away. If you believe in standing up, even quietly, for what's right, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story. Because somewhere out there, someone else is sitting in for, waiting to know they're not alone. The story of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's eventful flight is a testament to how, at times, the smallest actions can have the most powerful ripple effects. One person's steadfastness, coupled with the solidarity of a community, can challenge ambiguous rules and underlying biases. This incident not only defended the personal freedom of a passenger, but also awakened a sense of justice and respect for diversity in a public space. The lesson learned is that, regardless of where or under what circumstances, maintaining composure and speaking up when core values are violated is always meaningful. Sometimes, grand pronouncements aren't necessary. A steady heart and an attentive crowd are enough to enact change.